Hello there, and welcome back. I'm Martin, and today on Daddy Rolled a One, I'm doing another one of my DM advice videos. Now, these used to be called my campaign prep series, campaign prep videos, but this is the same thing. I've just retitled it to DM advice to make it a little bit more inclusive of all the different types of topics that I'm going to be discussing, because it's not limited to just how I prep for a session, which is, I felt, what the former title conveyed. In this particular video, I'm going to be talking about a few ways that you can incorporate different things that you might not normally put into a session or into a campaign. You might kind of forget about, but they're ideas that can help to get the players a little bit more involved, but also to add just a touch of uniqueness to your game, so that you're not just, it's not always just, go into the dungeon, kill the monsters and take their treasure. But conversely, it's not always just the kind of what's more common now is the sort of the heroes are out to save the world or the universe or the multiverse or whatever from, the big bad guy. There are things that you can put into a session that maybe the players follow up on, or maybe they don't, but it gives them a way to kind of approach the world so that the world seems more immersive and more lived in. But I'm also going to be talking in this video about how to get your players a little bit more involved, how to make sure that there are repercussions for their actions. That's one of the things that I think my players didn't quite get at the beginning, but every action that they choose to take is going to have a repercussion. And if they choose not to do something, that's also going to have a repercussion. And so how you can let them know that through adding things to the campaign to let them know what's happened based on their actions. And I'm also going to be talking a little bit in this video, not spending a lot of time on it, but on ideas where I've made adjustments for the younger players in my game. I'm going to give you one specific example, and it's going to be quick, but I'm just talking about how I've had to adapt things to account for the age of my players. So they're all 14, almost 15 now, but when we started, they were like 10 or 11. And so as they get older, I do adjust things as well. And then later, I'm going to be talking about how one of our players, or two of our players, actually, I should say, how they left the campaign. So there were two sisters. They had joined the campaign one of them from the very beginning, and her sister joined the very next session, I think it was. And then they moved. And so they did not want to continue playing. I'd offered them to continue playing on like Skype or Zoom or whatever, and they opted not to because they were really playing for the in-person experience and to hang out with their friends. And so I needed to figure out a way to have their characters exit the game, and I wanted to do something special for them because it was the first time they'd ever played, and we were also sorry to see them move. So I'm going to talk about that at the end. So really quickly, you see here, you've seen this before, but this is my small notebook. This is where I take my notes by hand, and I'm just like scribbling ideas, and I'm trying to figure out like how things are going to work together. And then I eventually transferred them, and I started typing them out into my DM notebook, where I have things written out where I can actually read it, because this is not, it's, my handwriting is awful and I can't necessarily read it quickly at a glance during a session. But this is something that I can read really quickly. I use bullet points. I use bolds for names or things that I just want to make sure I don't forget. And this is something that I can very quickly look at, and I have this right in front of me. I don't use a DM screen, but this is a book I have, and I stand kind of apart from the players, so they're not close enough where they could read this upside down from, because they're all would be sitting in front of me. And I do stand when I'm DMing, so that's another thing that's a little bit different. I never sit, because I'm constantly moving around to convey like a sense of action and a sense of I want to say anxiety. That's not the right word, but it's this sense of like tension and suspense. I'm up, I'm moving around. I will get close to a certain player when I'm interacting with that player, so that they feel kind of, they can tell that they're the ones that's on the spot that needs to come up with an idea or an answer or something like that. And I find that it just makes the game much more dynamic than me just sitting the whole time. Also, I'm not going to lie, it helps just kind of get me a little bit of exercise, helps me get off of my seat. I'm sitting all week at work. So when I DM, standing up kind of lets me stretch my legs and just make sure that I'm not just being complacent sitting all the time. Okay, so in this particular video, I'm going to cover sort of like 3 sessions that happen. So as you remember, the characters are going through module B2, which is Keep on the Borderlands. I forgot to pull it off my shelf, but I'll put a picture of it here. So This is an original old school adventure from the late 70s. And this is the one that they're going through. So essentially the gist of it is there is a keep on a obviously on a borderland on a the fringes of civilization, and then there are these caves that are a few hours walk from, or march from the keep, and these caves are sort of filled. Well, they're called the Caves of Chaos, and I kind of really dove into that idea that they're chaotic. Um, but they're filled with different monster tribes. And I have changed my monster tribes, a lot of them to kind of adhere to a version of this that Professor Dungeon Master did on his Dungeon Craft channel. It's called the Caves of Carnage campaign. And I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. I highly recommend watching that if you want to see how someone can adapt an old school game to make it a little bit different. But I follow a lot of his ideas. And again, I've had to tone them down a little bit based on the age of my players. But one of the things that I put into here was a rival adventuring group. I'm going to be talking about that in a minute. But that's something that a lot of people don't think about including in a campaign. But I love this idea, and I actually made it a 1-for-1 group. So for every player character that I had a commensurate, but evil, or maybe not quite evil, but kind of a bad guy version of their character. So my campaign is a reminder. These are the player characters. I had 3 elves, I had a fighter, and I had a cleric, and there was a thief. And so in the rival adventuring group, I had a fighter who was the leader, and I had a rival cleric of a rival religion. And then I had 3 dark elves. And then I had, instead of a thief, I had an assassin. And just as like a fun aside, so the thief in my game, she decided to call her character Augustus. And she goes by the nickname August, but her character's name is Augustus. And so I decided to name my assassin character Tiberius. And I was just trying to see if anybody would catch the reference there. If you're not familiar, Tiberius was the Roman emperor who took after when Augustus died. And so I thought it would just be funny. As it turned out, nobody got it. So that was just a joke for me, I guess. But anyway, I thought that was kind of clever. So I invented a rival adventuring game. We're going to talk about how to use them in the game to kind of like up the tension and increase the, again, the immersiveness of the world, but also giving us some clues about decisions that the player characters might want to make in the game. But in this particular group of sessions that I planned out here, I had foreshadowed. I talked about foreshadowing in my last video. A little bit before here, so this is in the previous few sessions, there's a character named Curfew Murphy. Again, I've talked about her before, but she was mentioning how she was friends with the daughter of the Castellan. I decided the daughter's name was Rowena. And Curfew Murphy's mentioning that her friend's not been acting the same. Well, as it turns out, Rowena has been engaged, I guess, against her will to the son of a rival baron. And so she's not super happy about it, but or at least that's what she claimed. And so she was a little upset about this. And so in this particular session, I was planning for like the wedding procession of Rowena, and then you can see here in my notes I put and a kidnapping. Obviously, that's kind of pretty obvious here, but that's what's going to happen. So that's what all the foreshadowing was leading to, and why she was unhappy. So one of the things that had happened in the previous session was the player characters had kind of saved the town. There was this horrific event. It was sort of our Halloween session, and again, just see that video here. I'll put a link to it so you can figure out what happened. But they return to town and they're beat up, they're hurt, they're wounded. A lot of bad things are going on. And when they got back to town, they eventually go to the tavern that they visit a lot. And while they're there, they hear people talking about the Executioners, this group called the Executioners. Again, this is a name I got from Professor Dungeon Master's channel. I mention that a lot because I don't want people to think I'm taking credit for his work. So I know that, I mentioned that from time to time. And that's just because like every time I bring up a concept that I've taken from his game, I want to make sure people don't think that I'm trying to claim that that's my own idea. I took that name from him. I just thought it was a great, easy name to use. And it was one less thing I had to come up with on my own. So I used his idea of the executioners, but I had all these people in the tavern like, hooray for the executioners. Like they saved us from this horrible event that was, going to kill the whole town. And the player characters got really upset, which is exactly what I wanted. So of course the executioners aren't around. They're not there at the time because they're smart. They know what's going on. Their assassin person is on the lookout, making sure when the player characters are around, so the executioners are never there at the same time. And but it turns out they've been taking credit for the work being done by the player characters who have decided to call themselves the Shadow Hunters. And so the player characters were really upset with this idea of the rival adventuring group taking credit for their work. They are going to get a chance to or at least think they're going to get a chance to get their revenge against the executioners, but that's not going to come for a while because, again, you don't want these things to resolve too quickly because then it's not satisfying. What you want is this sort of ongoing nemesis that's always a thorn in their side, that's always stealing the treasure from them, or coming in to mop up after they've moved on and then taking credit for their work. And I wanted that to be going on. And so this idea of these executioners, they've heard the name before, but they didn't connect exactly what was happening until this particular session. So this is session 12, but they've been hearing the name of the executioners probably since about session 5 or 6. And we play about roughly once every month. It's a little longer than that with the holidays and things like that. But so there was going to be this wedding for this character, Rowena. And so I was describing again what that entailed. There was a parade and all these things. And that was one of the things I wanted to talk about, was how to use events, uncommon events that you wouldn't think about putting in a role-playing game to again, make the world seem lived in. And so the idea was that this was this parade for this, aristocratic character, the daughter of the castellan who's being married. And so I described like all the out of town visitors coming into town, which is a chance for, the characters to meet some new people from different cultures. It's also a chance for the thief character, if she wants to see if, maybe she wants to try out her pickpocketing skills in the big crowd and see if she can come across some items that she normally couldn't get access to in the keep. So that's an opportunity. But it's also an opportunity, if she's thinking of that, she's also thinking that the official thieves guild in town would be thinking of that as well. And so that was something that she had to kind of contend with, was like, did she want to take the chance if maybe there's increased security, which of course there would be because it's the castellan's daughter that's being betrothed. But I had, again, out of town merchants coming into town. I had a halfling caravan coming in selling all kinds of supplies. I had a whole table that I created, and I can share that with you if you're interested. Just send me an email, put that in the show notes below. But I created a table of like the types of items that you might find in this like crazy halfling caravan. And, they're not like super powerful magic items. They're just kind of like fun little things that maybe it's like a one-use item, or maybe it's not useful at all unless the player characters can figure out how to make it useful. But I had that, and I had cookies and cakes, and I had pennants, and I had kerchiefs that were, had symbols of the different barons of their families and things like that. Now, the reason this is important was because if you remember, I was having my player characters write the summaries of the recaps of what happened during the session. I was having the players do it in the voice of their player characters. And so what was fun was for me to see, I had described what was going on during this parade for this betrothal. And the girl who wrote the recap for this particular time, she really leaned into this idea of like describing in detail everything that her character was seeing, because her character was sort of like a barbarian in a sense. She's a fighter, but culturally she was a barbarian and hadn't seen these things before. And so she talked all about all of the food that was there and the colors, and she talked about the acrobats, and she said like the parade was boring, but the acrobats were really fun. And it was just kind of fun to see how she perceived her character might have thought of what was happening during this parade. And she locked on to these acrobats, which I had kind of barely explained, but she went into a little bit more detail about it. But again, it's using this event to help the world seem lived in. And also it was giving them a sense of, again, it's creating an opportunity for them to, if they want to respond to this, and then I could build on that and use it as an adventure. So they might have decided to leave the keep and accompany this halfling caravan. That was an opportunity if they were interested in that. They weren't, so that didn't happen. They could have decided to offer themselves to the officials at the keep as extra guards for the caravan, for the wedding caravan, the wedding coach. and they opted not to do that as well. But these were all things that I'm putting in there. And again, I'm not going to force them to do anything, but I'm trying to create situations for them so that they don't feel like that their only opportunity is to just keep going back to the caves and exploring them and then coming back. They have options. Okay, so that was the wedding caravan. So I'm going to kind of skip around here a little bit, but essentially, just so you know, what happens is the woman that's being betrothed, her name was Rowena, again, the daughter of the Castellan. So she had actually been, I decided, and I hadn't thought of this until I was planning this particular session, but I decided that she had actually been a apprentice of the witch. So currently in the campaign, again, if you're following my campaign videos, the 3 elves are apprentices of the witch. And those are the only 3 that the witch has currently. They didn't know that the Castellan's daughter had formerly been an apprentice, and she had basically skipped out. She was breaking her promise to the witch. And that's a big deal because when the 3 elves became apprentices of the witch put like a white gold band on their ankle. It magically affixed, and it said it's not going to be removed for 7 years. So for 7 years, they are her apprentices, and they have to do what she says. And so later on, what's going to happen is when they encounter Rowena and they finally, interact with her, they see that she's her foot is turning purple, and she's got this like dark purple ring around her ankle, and that's because she broke her promise to the witch. And so little by little, this anklet, it's a magical thing, it's having an effect. But that was also letting my players know, you do not want to break your promise to the witch, because at the very least, your foot's probably going to fall off. And so it was kind of letting them know like what the repercussions would be if they broke their promise, because they were very reluctant to do this in the first place. The witch is the only person that's training them right now. So I've made it very clear in the game that if the witch doesn't keep training them, they're not going to get new spells, because that's the only way that they're going to learn them. They need to have, in this, I decided in my campaign that they need to have a superior person in arcane knowledge be the one that trains them to gain their new spells. So again, that was letting them know, but it's adding a little bit more depth to the character, the fact that she was a former apprentice of the witch, which also was indicating to them, hey, this character probably knows some magic, so you might want to be careful when you're interacting with her. She's not a helpless young girl. Okay, well, so I had that character also had her have fallen in love with this bandit leader. And I talked about him before. His name is Angus, Black Angus. I call him Angus the Black. And I later started referring to him as the Black Serpent of the Bog. But I had spoken about him in one of my previous videos. He's right here. And again, all these pictures I just got off of Pinterest, so you can find these very easily. But I basically told the story that he was a former knight that was, of much renown, but something had happened. Something happened in the course of his knighthood. He saw something, or he picked something up that he shouldn't have, or whatever it was, had a curse cast on him. But he eventually becomes a heretic, and he starts conducting unnatural rituals, and he became a cannibal. And so he leaves the life of the knights behind him, but all of the knights that he controlled, including another one named Red Fergus, or Fergus the Red, however you want to say that, they had been cast out of the knighthood by the Great Church. And so they had become, sort of heretics. Well, both Angus and Fergus end up becoming bandits, but they're sort of like rival bandit groups, because Fergus was really upset that Angus did this and basically made all of his other knights become outlaws. Like, they have to live on the lam and try to, they turn to banditry to pay their bills and basically feed their families, is essentially what was happening. And so Fergus was upset about this. So if you know the adventure B2, Keep on the Borderlands, there are some caves in there, and a lot of them they're like kobold caves, and there's orc caves and goblin caves, and there's another orc cave, and then there's just different ones. So I think there's a bandit cave. And so I had the bandit cave, like I kind of expanded that a little bit. I expanded that idea of the bandit cave, and that one was the one that's run by Red Fergus, I decided. Characters had not interacted with him yet at the caves. They hadn't encountered the bandit cave yet at this point in the story. So Um, anyway, they decide to they watch the parade, and then another thing that happened in these particular group of sessions is that the innkeeper Gustav is talking to them, and he mentions that business is really bad, and he's been hearing that the characters have been going to the caves of chaos, and so he says to them, like, is there something there that you could get for me and bring back, and that I could, display here at the tavern to try to, like, draw business in. He's trying, and they really like him. I've talked about him before, but he's one of their favorite characters, one of their favorite NPCs in the whole campaign. And so they kind of would do pretty much anything for him, but he's asking very nicely. He's saying, like, hey, is there any chance you can find something there that I might be able to use to kind of like drum up business? And so they agreed that yes, the next time they're there, they will look. The other thing that happens is when the elves are talking to the witch, she says she left a pair of boots in the caves once. She was forced to flee. And so she asks if they can go find her boots, their magic boots, polish them, and then return them to her. So these are called hard leads. So this is essentially me using NPCs to kind of prompt the players to figure out what they want to do next. Now, if they didn't want to do that, they could have told Gustav, no, we're not going back to the caves. We're doing something else. And again, I would be fine with that. I'm going to roll with whatever they decide. But every once in a while, I want to give them a hard lead so that if they're stuck, then they have an option of like, hey, well, we can always go do this. And so that's what happened. In this particular case, the reason that I had two hard leads was because the player character split up. The elves went to go talk to the witch, and the remaining characters, the cleric, fighter, and thief, had gone to the tavern. And so they interacted with Gustav. And so I just gave them both a lead that essentially would lead them back to the caves. And as the group, they decided that they wanted to do that. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the rival adventuring gang. I think it would make more sense to just dive in. So, what's going to happen eventually is the player characters enter a particular cave, and I had it set up where there were some prisoners from the keep. It was the brother and the brother's wife and some guards that were members of the guild, and so player characters work with the guild before, and so this is later sessions, but the guild master, so it's his brother that was kidnapped. He gives a lead to the player characters and says, hey, my brother's been kidnapped. There were bandits on the road. I'm not sure which ones, but we think it's this guy, Red Fergus, or Fergus the Red, and where his cave is located. They had a map, and they have also been to the caves before, so they kind of had a general idea of the layout. So they went to go, rescue this guy. And as it turns out, it wasn't Fergus the Red's bandit camp that had kidnapped this guy. It was cannibals that were in league with Angus the Black. So they weren't really bandits, they were cannibals. But in any event, they were conducting some they were getting ready basically to eat these guys. So they were kind of like, seasoning them up and getting them ready. They had them on racks and they were oiling them and all this kind of stuff. It was pretty gruesome stuff. But in any event, the player characters go in. It's a small room, and they move in to try to rescue this guy and his wife from these cannibals. And a fight breaks out. And in the middle of the fight, the executioners show up, because the information that the player characters got about who had kidnapped these guys and where they were located, that was actually in a note that was left for the leader of the executioners by their assassin character. And the note got basically, it went missing, and it ended up in the hands of the thief character. So that was, again, a little bit of foreshadowing for me, but also, again, it was a lead. So I'm, again, constantly giving leads to the player characters to see what or if they want to follow up on something. So one of the things that fell into their hands was this note that basically said there's a secret room between the orc lair and the bandit lair. And so when the characters went there, they used that secret room and were able to sneak in, and they were trying to rescue these characters when the rival adventuring gang showed up. And so this big fight broke out because the executioners, whether they're stupid and they didn't realize this, or whether they were very savvy and they recognized that these were their rivals that, could essentially expose them for taking credit for their work. But the rival adventuring party starts fighting both the cannibals, the bad guys, as well as the player characters. It was a massive chaotic fight. A fire broke out. There were barrels of black powder there that were exploding because a torch got dropped. And so at the end of this particular session, the player characters ran out, but as it turned out, the executioners did end up rescuing most of the prisoners. The PCs only rescued one, and the executioners got five, and they all ran out. And then in the chaos and all the smoke and everything, the executioners got away and went back to the keep, and the player characters were very disoriented. They were also extremely wounded from their battle, and so they weren't able to keep up with the executioners and kind of track them down, unfortunately. So that was kind of sort of how I have been using this rival venturing gang. So the characters have not run into them again yet, because I think that, the executioners realized that was sort of a close call, but they will definitely come up again because the PCs want to get revenge. They're tired of these guys against sort of stealing their thunder. So that was a rival adventuring gang. However, a couple things happened in that particular session. So one was that I mentioned a couple of the player characters were really hurt. They were extremely, extremely wounded to where when they got back to the keep, they had to visit the doctor, the barber surgeon. I've talked about him before, to get some healing. So I decided in this particular campaign, clerical healing is very, very rare. The cleric had it. But he had already used it earlier that day. So he had one Cure Light Wound spell and he'd already used it. So they had one healing potion. They used that. So I do run sort of a lower magic world because I like seeing how the player characters interact with that and the decisions that they make and the opportunities it gives them to be creative to figure out things out. But in any event, they were able to get back to the keep and visit the doctor. And so the doctor did some, surgery and repaired their wounds. But one of the things I was talking about, repercussions. So this was one of the opportunities for me to use that, which is I let them know, hey, when you're hurt that bad, once the surgery's over, like this guy is not a modern surgeon with modern equipment. He's basically doing a quick patch job. So you're going to have a scar. And so one of the things that started having happen to the players was letting them roll on a table to figure out where the scar is going to be, and then describe like what it looks like. But essentially they're now marked with this scar, and I make it as such in the game that like it's going to be visible. It's something that like people are going to notice. And it doesn't really have any mechanical effect other than it is kind of hard for them to sort of disguise themselves unless they're trained in that, because they've got this identifying mark on them. So, they can put a hood over their face or like whatever to try to, hide. But for the most part, they have an identifiable scar now. And, whether they want that to be a point of pride or something to be, like they try to hide it or whatever. But again, it's something that it adds again, a little bit more realism to the world, but it also lets them know there's repercussions. If you're constantly going to the battle and constantly getting hurt, your body's going to get beat up and it's going to be scarred. There's a famous painting. I think it's Alex Ross. It's a comic book painting, but it's Bruce Wayne's Batman, and he's sitting on his like a chair or on the side of his bed or something after he gets back from his night out of patrolling, and he's got like his Batman outfit off. And he's just sitting there and his back is exposed, and you just see all these like crazy scars on his back. And that's just from his constant, fighting with thugs and people like that who are constantly, slashing him with knives or whatever it is, or being shot. And so I kind of like that aesthetic. And so I wanted the player characters to know, like, this is something that's going to happen. So that's a repercussion. Another repercussion that happened, and again, I'm trying to hold the players accountable. They were in a different area fighting a different group of bandits. This is when they were trying to rescue the Castellan's daughter. So they finally tracked down who had kidnapped her. And so she was being held in this bandit camp. As it turns out, she went with them willingly. She was in love with the leader. And so she went with them willingly, and she helped stage the entire kidnapping, including the stealing of the dowry, so that she and her lover could escape with it and kind of start a new life. And so they were in this like forested bandit camp. And while they were there during a fight, again, a fire broke out. And I had made it very clear, like, there's a fire, there's a roasted rabbit on a spit, like the bandits are drunk. And so there was a lot of bandits. So I was trying to give the player character sort of an opportunity to, be sneaky. But as it is, they went into a headlong fight, and the spit got knocked off of the fire, and it set the room ablaze. It hit like a pile of dirty rags or something. And so and these are like, essentially it's like a tree houses in a forest, and it was in autumn, so the leaves are dry, they're falling off, so it was just ripe for like an instantaneous like tinderbox kind of thing. And so the player characters jumped out. Several of them had problems with smoke inhalation, but they got out, and there was some prisoners left in the bandit camp, and it was ablaze. And I specifically mentioned when they had gone into the forest, there was a stream like right there. The bandits built it there for a reason, because they wanted fresh, clean water. And so there was a stream there with buckets that the bandits used to carry back and forth to their tree houses to get water. And I had mentioned that before. And for whatever reason, they either forgot or they didn't hear me or whatever it is, but they didn't make any attempt to put the fire out. They were like, oh no, there's nothing we can do. And they just left it, and they left it burned. And I happened to mention, like, you can hear the screams of the people inside burning alive in these flames. And they were just like, I don't know what to do. And they left. And I mean, we talked later, and I said, hey, what about trying to do something? Like, you had an opportunity to try to get some water on that, or at least, at risk of life and limb, save the prisoners from the keep, like the good people that had been kidnapped, like the handmaiden to the Castellan's daughter. And they were like, oh yeah, I guess we could have done that. Like, so again, I was just trying to let them know, like, things just don't, it's not like a sitcom where everything's wrapped up in 30 minutes and everything's perfect at the end. Like, they made a decision that had an impact on the world, which is that a bunch of people died and this whole section of the forest burned down. And it is what it is, but I'm not punishing them. So I didn't, take it out on them. I didn't like, give them a curse or anything like that, but it was more just to let them know that because of the decisions that they made, it had an impact. And so that's what I was talking about a little bit earlier when I was talking about repercussions. So there's that. And then that also leads into another thing that I wanted to talk about, which is how to add tension to the game. So in this particular case, the reason that they went to this forest area was because it was this sense of timing. Like the Castellan's daughter had been kidnapped. And so the longer they waited to go try to look for her, the more clues they were going to lose. It was raining, and so tracks were getting covered. And so they needed to be on the case right away if they were going to go look for her, they needed to do it right then, despite the fact that they weren't necessarily equipped at the time. They hadn't prepared to do that. Because they didn't know that was going to happen. And so timing is a thing that you can do to add tension, to let the players know that, like, hey, I mean, you can wait, you can go back to the keep and resupply, but at that point, these guys will have at least a day's lead on you, if not more. And they didn't know that they were going to be in the forest. They could have just gone traveling and kept going, in which case the characters probably never would have caught up with them. So this idea of adding tension from timing. I also add tension through things like descriptions. So there's a place in here where they encounter the owlbear. That's the prize that they're going to bring back for the owner of the tavern, Gustav Gobblegut. They do encounter the owlbear. They did end up killing it, and they took its 3 eggs and they cut the head off and they skinned it. And that was because they remembered. So in this particular case, they did remember this conversation, that Gustav Gobblegut had asked for some kind of something, let's call it a trophy, from the caves that he could display in his bar, in his tavern, to try to increase his customer base. And so the characters realized, like, hey, this is something unique and different. They'd never heard of nor seen an owlbear. So they thought that was a good thing that he could put on display. And so they took care to again skin it and wrap the head in like a blanket and carried it back to the tavern with them. So, but when they were in the owlbear lair, I used all of the senses to describe what was happening. So the owlbear, they could hear it growling and grunting, but because they're in the lair, they're underground, it's dark, they couldn't get a good sense of where they were. And so they could hear it like crunching on bones, and they could hear it when it moved around because there were dry leaves that had blown into this lair from the outside. And so they could hear it moving around, but they couldn't quite tell where it was coming from because everything's echoing, sounds echoing all around. And then I mentioned just this foul, awful stench because the bear is in its lair, and so it's doing its business in there. And so it just smells awful, but there's also rotting corpses. And so it's just adding this immersiveness to describing that. And as I'm describing this and they're moving through this area, it was increasing the tension because I kept layering on one more thing, a sound or a smell or something that they see. They might see the discarded, ripped, and shredded clothing or cloak from a tavern. A guard from the keep. And so that's a clue that like people from the keep have come here before, but they have not made it out. So again, using all these different types of senses to create a sense of anxiety. I want the players to be scared. I want them to, be on the edge of their seat, wondering what's going to happen next. And so I do that through these descriptions. And I do when I talk. I know I talk very fast in my videos, but when I'm playing the game, I slow it down. And so it's like, oh, you're moving through this layer, and it's you're just surrounded by this dark, oppressive sense that like the layer's closing in around you because you can't see the end. You're feeling your way along, and then you hear an echo of leaves crunching and loud thudding of something, you don't know what it is, but something walking on these dried leaves, and it sounds like it's coming from every direction. And so they get really anxious when that happens, which is exactly what I'm going for. So that's a way to increase tension, as well as again, I talked about timing, but also through your description, make sure it's all the senses. It's not you see an owlbear roll initiative. That's boring and it doesn't create excitement, and then it just becomes routine. The owlbear doesn't become this scary mythological beast. It just becomes a way to get more XP, and I don't like to play that way. So that's one sense of it. So I talked about the repercussions of the players. I've talked about events. We've talked about tension. So a couple things I wanted to talk about. One was how to get the players involved. And so one of the things I started doing with this session, it was actually with session 12, is when the players started to get hurt during combat, I started to ask them to describe what happened. So if they got hit during the combat, I asked them to describe like what it would have felt like, or like maybe where they got hit, because that was going to help me later if I had to roll on that scar table. And then when they are attacking somebody in combat, whether they hit or they missed, I asked them to describe what happened. I know what weapon they're using, but like, where are you attacking? How are you doing it? How are you moving? And it was getting them up out of their seats. And one of the players really gets into it. She loves to kind of move around and get very descriptive and about how she's attacking with her sword. Other players are like, oh, I just, I whacked it on the head with my staff, or like whatever. But then as this girl gets really into it, then they start to get into it, which is what I was hoping for. So having the players describe, not just I did 4 hit points of damage. Again, that's boring and it takes you out of the game because then it becomes about numbers. It's describing how they're attacking. Are they crouching down? Are they trying to get behind the guy? Are they are they making a feint to one side and then attacking on the other side? Or are they working together and one person's a distraction, like whatever it is? And for them, that becomes a little bit more fun because then it's less about numbers and it's more about this narrative storytelling thing where they get to describe things that their characters are doing, and it helps them think of their characters as being real people. So that was one thing. Another thing that happened as far as getting my players involved was that my daughter decided that her character, so she has the character named Cora Netflix. That's a very 10-year-old name. She was 10 when she made up this name. She's an elf. Originally, she was going to call herself Jingle the Elf, but then she changed that to be Cora Netflix. But then about, around this time in the campaign, she came to me separately and said, I actually want my character's name to be Quinn, but I don't want anybody else in the game to know that that's my character's name. And I said, okay, well then what impact is it going to have? Like if your name's Quinn, but everybody calls you Cora and you never tell them your name's Quinn, then what's the point of you being Quinn? And I was fine that she was doing this. I was just trying to understand like where her head was at. And she said like, oh, well, like maybe something happened in my past. And so I changed my name to Cora, but it's really Quinn. And I said, okay, that I can work with. So that explained why she didn't want the other characters to know, the other players to know. And so I started dropping in hints because I decided that like someone was looking for Quinn, because again, she said something that happened in her past. I don't know what that thing is. I can either work with my daughter on that, or I can surprise her. It's kind of going to be up to her what she wants, because at the time she hadn't decided what the thing was that she had done to make her want to change her name. But in any event, I wanted to kind of respond to this, that she had this idea. So I I decided that people were looking for her, and it starts with the Thieves Guild. So various places in here, you'll see I have notes. This one's a little hard to read, but I mentioned that Scabs was looking around, and then he asked Augustus, the thief character, if she's seen Quinn. And then I said, the Rudderkin wants a word. Now, Rudderkin, if you do level titles from old advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you'll know Rudderkin was one of the level titles for an assassin character. I just thought it was a cool name. I didn't know who the Rudderkin was. And again, I didn't know why he or she was looking for Quinn, but I wanted to install this sense of mystery. So what happened was, I had Scabs meet with Augustus and say, hey, the Rudderkin's looking for Quinn. Can you help him out? Or, can you help the Rudderkin out? Rudderkin's looking for Quinn. And Augustus was like, who's Quinn? And Scabs was like, don't you know? And so I was playing a little coy, but I've been doing this for months at this point. And these conversations happen in the open. So my daughter heard me say this, and that was her clue that, like, I remember that she asked me to do this, so I'm putting it into the game. But I'm letting the players and my daughter, I'm letting them kind of lead the narrative of where the story's going to go. But like every once in a while, they'll be in the tavern and someone will say, like, hey, I thought you were going to help the Rudderkin out. Like, where's Quinn? And the people who say this make it very clear that they know who Quinn is, and they've seen Augustus with Quinn. And the player who plays Augustus, she's just mystified. She can't figure out who it is. And it's never occurred to her that it's probably one of the other player characters. And I'm very careful to never have this conversation happen if my daughter's character is in the tavern. It's only when she's not there. And I also make sure that the people that ask about her are not there when my daughter's character is there. So there's never this opportunity to get everyone in the room at the same time. And it's just been this fun little tease that I've been doing, but it was a way, again, that I'm responding to a request that my daughter had. And that's just my way of handling it. I'd love to know how you would handle that if you were the DM, how you'd want to do something like that. So leave me a comment in the note below. Also, if you have an idea of what Quinn could have done to make her change her name to Cora, let me know. Put that in the notes below. So if you watch these videos before, Cora is part of a group of 3 elf cousins that all grew up in this town called Wibbleville. But apparently the cousins don't realize this past activity of Quinn. They only know her as Cora. So that's a way of involving, getting the players involved. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about was, 2 things. So one was this idea of, I mentioned having to adapt things for a younger audience. So one of the things that I had, I took this idea again from Professor Dungeoncraft, but in his keep, he has a brothel. And, I wasn't going to have that conversation with my daughter and her friends, all girls, about there was a brothel in the town. And so I just changed it and called it the Old Municipal Theater. So everything that Professor Dungeoncraft does in the brothel, which is basically a place to exchange information, and you can dabble in vices like potion tasting, and where there's like unidentified potions and you don't know what it is, but you taste it for a fee, and you kind of get like, it's almost like taking a drug. So I didn't quite describe it that way, but I let him know that, like, there's things happening here that aren't quite on the up and up, but they were just curious. So they went to go visit the theater. They have never gone back. But one of the things that's interesting was that the proprietress of this theater, I ended up deciding that she is actually the Rudderkin. So she's an information broker. That is her job. Is she learns everything she can about people, and she keeps that information, safe until she can sell it for a profit to somebody who is really interested. So because lots of people come through, a lot of unsavory people go through her theater, she gets information. So when the player characters went in, she recognized Quinn, or maybe asked people about, I'm not really sure. I haven't figured that out yet because it's not really relevant at this point. But I've decided that she's actually the Rudderkin that's asking after Quinn. And maybe it's to blackmail her because she knows that she's, my daughter's character is trying to keep this, on the down low, or like whatever it is. But that was just a way that I changed that really quickly for my daughter's game. So, they end up fighting the Minotaur at a certain point. And in my game, the Minotaur I used it. If you remember this guy, he's from the movie Gladiator. He was one of the gladiators that was wearing like this big bull mask. So I had it be a human in a bull mask, and there was a big reveal about who it was. Um, but the last thing I'm going to talk about is how I kind of transitioned these two players, these two sisters in the game, sisters in real life. They moved, and I wanted to kind of give them sort of a sense of closure of playing in our game. So this is like session 15 eventually that we come up to. But if you remember, one of the players, her name is Greta the Wanderer. She wears blue face paint. She carries a spear. She's the barbarian character. And she's played by one of the sisters that was moving. So in her background, I had created the character for her, and I just wrote like, "You're wanted for a crime," and she decided it was a crime that she didn't commit. And so I told her, "Okay, you're accused of murdering the son of um, of the Baron." Okay, and so. Of a Baron, I guess I should say. And so this whole time, like there's been wanted posters and she's been dealing with this. Like there's even been pictures of her posted in the tavern, like a wanted poster where she's had to hide who she was because she was afraid of getting caught. And so it's been this constant thorn in her side that people think that that Greta killed someone. And she didn't do it. And she's been trying to figure out like who did it and why, who framed her. And so I had this idea of this this marriage happening with the daughter of the castellan. And so everything just kind of came together at the right time. And I decided that the person that she was marrying, who was this bandit leader, ex-knight, a heretic, part cannibal, a natural, experiments going on, that he was the one that killed this guy that she was accused of killing. And the reason he did it was because he found out that this guy was interested in Rowena, and Black Angus liked Rowena. And so he, in a jealous rage, he killed this guy, but then he saw how upset it made Rowena. He didn't tell her it was him, but he saw that it made her upset because, she's not a horrible person, and she did have feelings that this guy got murdered. And so Black Angus figured out really quickly, like he didn't want to tell her that it was him. And so he blamed it on the last person that he'd seen around. And he wanted to have a very descriptive person. So it wasn't sort of like it sounded like he was making it up. And so he had seen Greta the Wanderer's character around. And so he said, "Oh, it's this barbarian woman from the Outlands who paints her face in blue face paint and has this like really elaborate spear." And so that was believable enough because a lot of people were like, "I remember seeing her there. She was around." And so that news got spread around, which is how that story spread. Well, as it happened in the game, I wanted to make sure that this player figured out who had framed her and why. And so I had started setting this up so that they knew who this guy was. They'd heard rumors of Black Angus and who he was. And they were given a tip off that he was the one that had set her up. And they got that tip off from Fergus the Red, who was one of his former, subordinates in this knightly order. I just mentioned him a few minutes ago. But Fergus was upset with Black Angus because he'd been kicked out of the knighthood because of what Angus had been doing. And so he had been keeping tabs on him. And he said, and he recognized Greta when they had an interaction. And he basically said, "Look, you leave me and my bandits alone. I'm just trying to feed my family. So you leave us alone to conduct our business with the orcs and the goblins in the cave." They had like a sort of a little economic situation going on of trade. And he's like, and they had the numbers. So the player characters kind of had to listen to him. He's like, "Look, you leave me and my guys alone, and I will tell you how to get to Angus so you can get your revenge on him." So they went to go fight him. That's when they interacted with Rowena again. She ends up running away into the forest, never to be seen again, of course. But they got the drop on Black Angus, and so they were able. I thought Greta was going to kill him. It was a huge thing because they just had a fight with the Minotaur, and because they knew where Black Angus was, they didn't want him to get away. And so even though they were wounded and like at half strength, she was like, "Nope, I'm going. I don't care if the rest of you guys go. I'm coming. I'm going after him." And so everyone went with her. And so again, this is the last session before they moved, and so she wanted to make sure that she got this closure. So she goes to confront Black Angus, defeats all of those guys. So it's just him left. And I rolled on the morale table, and he failed. And so I had him surrender to them and basically say, if you don't kill me, because again, he's in love with Rowena. So he was hoping that maybe there's going to be a happy ending and he could still get, it's not going to happen, but maybe he could. So he surrendered and said, "If you don't kill me, take me back to the keep, and I will swear under oath that I was the one that killed the guy so I can clear your name." And so they'd agreed to do that. So they go back to the keep, and now they're tightening everything up, right? So they turn him over to the authorities. Her name gets cleared, and then the witch ends up summoning Clara, who's one of the three elves, and says, "Hey, there's something happening in this far off land to the west. It's called the Purple Lands, and there's some kind of plague or something there, and I can sense it all the way over here in my tower. I can sense that this is happening, and it's bad, and I need someone to go look in on it, but I'm not going to. I can't. I have to stay here. I've got things going on here. So I'm sending you there. Like, you're my apprentice. You have to do what I say. So Clara the elf, I'm sending you to go investigate and report back what's going to happen. And then I suggest you take someone with you, like a bodyguard or somebody." And that was like my hint, like, "Hey, you should." And it took forever. This player couldn't figure out what I was doing. And then she was finally like, "Oh, I'll take Greta the Wanderer with me." I was like, "That's a great idea." And I was like, the witch is like, "Yes, that's the person to take." And so finally clued in. And so she agrees to take Greta. And then I was just trying to clean up a couple of other things. So one of the things that had happened in a previous session was that the guildmaster had thought that Clara the elf was in charge of the shadow hunters, and she's not, but it was sort of my way to kind of try to draw out the player and get her to interact a little bit more. And so she went to go meet with him and say that, "Hey, I'm leaving." She kind of started to figure out, the player had started to figure out, like, this was her opportunity to kind of like tie up all the loose ends. And so she went to go visit with him and said, "Hey, I'm leaving, but Bartolo is in charge of the shadow hunters," which didn't make the other players super happy because Bartolo is the only player that's played by an adult, played by the dad player. But in any event, she went and did that. And then, so they were getting ready to go. And, last thing they did was they went to the tavern to say goodbye to Gustav Gobblegut, the proprietor of the tavern, and he was like crying. He was like sad to see them go. He was a little upset. But one of the fun things that I had done was I had made these menus for the tavern, of the different kinds of things that were offered there, and so like bread and cheese, and how 5 silver pieces, or ale, small beer, wine, elven wine, honey meads, blah blah blah, right? Whatever. And so a few sessions, and so I always have this available. And I just put it on the table when we're playing, so that the players don't forget like what's available and what they can order. Because when they go to the tavern, I always have Gustav ask them like, "Hey, what do you want?" And they would get flummoxed and like deer in the headlights. And so I had this list for them so they could kind of decide. And it's really just again a way to be a little bit more immersive and also get them to spend some of their money that they've earned. But I asked the players, like the session before, I said, "Hey, what's Clara's favorite thing to get at the tavern, and what is Greta's favorite thing?" And so Greta said the hot pie, and Clara said the bread and cheese. And so when they showed up, I actually had printed a new menu, and Gustav, in their honor, had changed it to Clara's bread and cheese and Greta's favorite hot pie. And so he changed the menu in honor of them. And so the players thought that was kind of fun. That I had done that. So the other things that had happened was, one of my good friends on Twitter, his name's Redworm, and I highly recommend that you follow him if you don't already. So he likes to create D&D raps. So that's kind of like how he got started. And now he mainly tweets about the games that he plays with his son, who started at 4. His son's now 7, but he plays D&D with him. Anyway, so I had mentioned to him that, this player was leaving. And so he, if I remember correctly, I think he just did it unprompted and sent it to me, but he wrote a rap for this player. And the two girls, actually, the two players, Clara and Greta, played by these two sisters that were leaving. And he wrote this rap. And so if you remember, I have this NPC named Vasilov, who is like sort of a bard, essentially. He's like a bear trainer. And so I had him say to them that he had written this song or like this poem in their behalf. And I read it to them. I didn't rap it. I read it, but then I played the rap for them later. But he said he'd written a special song in honor of them. So it says, "Clara's on the scene, her cousin's by her side. Bow in hand, she's not shooting wide. Ulrich von Munchberger did decide that she should lead the shadow hunters on this wild ride. Greta, the wanderer, destiny," what's the name of her spear? "Destiny in her hands. She's been running from the law to the borderlands. Blue war paint, hesitant to attack. Now she's got revenge on Angus the Black. So this was perfect. I mean, I was almost in tears when he did this because he captured every little nook and detail and cranny, like all these little things that we've talked about in this game, and put it into this song and like on his own time and record this for them. And I was blown away. And so I had Vasilov read this to them as an in-game artifact, as something that he'd written for them based on their adventures. And they thought it was kind of fun. When I explained to them later that like someone that I don't even know in real life, it's someone I met on Twitter, wrote this, they were a lot more impressed. But they did that. And then the last thing that happened was this character by the name of Anselm. If you remember him, he's an NPC. He was the guard at the gate who had first noticed Greta when they walked in. And he had become a friend and an ally of the player characters. So he was at the gate. And a lot of times he ended up talking to them, but he always talked to Greta. And again, if you remember my previous videos, I like to have at least one NPC that's dedicated to each PC. And he was the one that was dedicated to Greta. So he ended up talking to her. But for whatever reason, the other girl players decided that there was like a romantic thing going on with him and Greta, which there was not at all. And of course, I'm not going to do that because I'm the dad. As an adult role playing this guy, wasn't going to get into that. But they thought it will, like, Ansel likes you, ooh, like whatever. And so, but I had him give her a painting that he had made of her, a drawing. And I got that because another friend of mine on Twitter, his name's William W. Connors. He's actually a former game designer for TSR back in the late 80s and through the mid 90s. So did a lot of Ravenloft stuff, did a lot of other things, did one of the Gazetteers. And so he's an artist now. And so he's a game designer, but he also does art. And so I think he saw that these characters were leaving, these players, sisters were leaving. And so he messaged me and said, like, hey, do you want some artwork for them? And so he created one for Greta the Wanderer. And I loved it so much, I decided to, again, use that as an in-game artifact. So here's the picture that he created for her. And I had Anselm give this to the players, sort of like, I made this for you to remember you by. So again, I was trying to do some nice things for them to kind of let the girls know, the two sisters, how much we were going to miss having them in this game and hanging out with them. And the last thing I did was they got horses. Ansel brought them horses. And because they were going to the Purple Lands, which were in the west, they left in the late afternoon. And so as they left, the sun was going down. And so I mentioned that they were riding off into the sunset. And that's where we ended the game, which is exactly where I wanted it to end. I was glad that the timing worked out, that we had enough time to fit that in. And so I said that, and it was hilarious because I said they ride off, into the sunset. And then one of the other players, the player who plays the thief character, it was like a light bulb went off, and she's like, oh, it's because they're leaving. And it was like, she hadn't figured out that all these things, like the proprietor of the inn, like naming the dishes after them, or the witch sending them on this mission, or the poem being written on their behalf, or the guard giving them the pain. Like, for whatever reason, none of that had connected that this was happening because these two sister players were leaving our game, and I was giving them a send off. But when I mentioned that the two horses were riding off into the sunset, I guess she'd seen enough movies to recognize that trope. And she's like, I get it. And I was like, did you really not get it before now? And she had no clue. She had not connected it before then. So anyway, that was just a way that I tried to finish that up. Let me know what you think of that idea, and also how you would have handled it. I mean, do you make a big production when people leave the games, or do their characters just disappear, or maybe they die in combat and then just everybody's satisfied, I guess, because there's an ending, whatever it is. Let me know. And let me know what you think about the rest of the video. I know it was kind of a little all over the place. I tried to organize it into buckets of ideas. These advice videos, I'm trying to just let you know how I do things during my game. And there's a lot of information, and I feel like just having one video on one topic would probably not quite be enough. So I kind of tried to combine a bunch into one particular video. But, again, let me know what you think about that. So coming up again, I'm going to be getting into my series on the history of Dragon Magazine, starting with that year 1, issues 1 through 12. I'll see if I can get all 12 in one video. It might be a little too much. I might have to cut it down, but I'll be looking into that. I am going to do that recap video I talked about, of sort of like, catching up on some mistakes and some errors that I made in my previous videos. I'm coming up on my year anniversary. So February 9th will be 1 year of having the channel. So I want to get that video out to just kind of cover off some things that I mistakenly said, and, people helpfully pointed out. And that's kind of like what to look for on the horizon. So, with that, I'd like to say, again, drop into the comments below and please let me know what you think about this video. And then while you're down there, you'll find places where you can connect with me on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky. You'll see a link to my blog. I'm going to be putting out a new post soon. I mentioned this in the last video, but I'm just polishing it off. It's going to be some new content for people who play old school versions of D&D, but it will work in it even if you play 5e. There's plenty of content in there that's system neutral that you can use. So that's going to be coming out, a blog post there. And then you'll also find places where you can visit my shop, which is your best way to support the channel right now. A lot of times people ask if I've got a Patreon or if I've got a coffee, I think it's pronounced, or whatever. I don't have any of those. So right now, the best way you can support me is if you buy a shirt or hoodie or poster or mug or notebook or whatever it is, with one of the exclusive designs that I have at my shop. So there's links down below where you can do that. So that's going to be it for this video. And I'd like to say thank you so very much for watching. Stay safe, happy gaming, and I will talk to you next time. Okay, now for the bonus content. This is what I was drinking and what I was listening to when I was working on my notes for this video. So it's a brand new year. I thought I'd splurge a little bit. So I dug into this. This is Kavalan single malt whiskey. And this is from, I want to say Taiwan. I should have looked this up before I started recording, but a friend gave this to me years ago. And my understanding is that you can only get this from, I think it's one of the Taiwan airlines. But you can only get it like in their like lounge area or whatever. So it's pretty hard to get. And this is a single malt whiskey. So it's a Scotch style whiskey. It's not Scotch, but it's a Scotch style whiskey. But it is aged in Oloroso sherry casks, and it is delicious. I really like this a lot. So it comes in this fancy box, and it's just very smooth. Yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of that kind of single malt characteristic. It is a little smoky, surprisingly enough, but very smooth. Normally I would put maybe a drop of water in this using a little eyedropper. But it's good neat as well. And it was, again, I've had this for a number of years, and I maybe drink it once a year. I just like pour myself a little bit. But again, New Year, I wanted to kind of splurge a little bit. All right. I was also listening to one of my absolute favorite albums. I don't think I've shared this one before. John Coltrane, Giant Steps. So 1959 is the year that this originally came out. So Giant Steps is the name of the album. It's also the name of the title track. And it is considered sort of like a rite of passage for saxophone players and jazz players to learn how to play. It is extremely complicated. When you hear it, it sounds extremely pleasant to the ear, but playing it is very, very difficult because it's not played in one key, and it uses Coltrane's very famous like circle of fifths, where he's putting different notes together in different keys that don't necessarily go together normally. But when you hear them, it sounds very fluid because he's using fifths and thirds to kind of keep things together. It gets really into heavy musical theory. I can't really explain it that well, other than to say when you hear it, it doesn't necessarily sound complicated, but when you see the sheet music and then you understand what went into it, he's basically changing keys like every note or every other note, like multiple times. So almost every second, he's like changing, he's skipping around this wheel, the wheel of fifths, and he's skipping from here to here to here to here. And so the way it's been described is like, essentially, if you think of musical keys as being languages, he's writing a song that's skipping from English to Japanese to Arabic to Spanish, all within the space of like 4 seconds. But he does it in such a way that it sounds like it was supposed to be that way. And to the untrained listener, you don't actually understand that that's what he's doing. But it's so complicated that he basically, he kind of wrote key changes. So he didn't write music. He kind of said like, I'm going to play this key and then this key and then this key. So his band comes in. And where it's really noticeable is that when the song starts out, Coltrane is playing just super fast sheets of sound, which is what he's known for. And all these like very quick key changes. And so he finishes his solo, and then it goes to the piano solo for, I think it was Tommy Flanagan on this particular one. And so, yeah. So Tommy Flanagan comes up on the piano, and right away you can hear him struggle because he's looking at the sheet music and he's like, oh my God, I have to change. Like, and he's improvising. That's the thing. He's improvising with these key changes, not knowing that that was what was going to happen. And he didn't have time to prepare, really. I mean, there's probably a couple takes on this, but they want to keep it fresh, so they don't write the music down. So he's improvising these things that's never been done before, and it's very noticeable that he's having trouble keeping up with the tempo. And so at a certain point, he stops playing with his left hand completely and just starts kind of noodling with his right hand for his solo. And then it goes back, and then Coltrane jumps back in, and when he comes in, you can immediately tell the difference between what he knew what he was doing, is because he wrote the song. So Tommy Flanagan is a very, very great piano player, very accomplished. And he always kind of said, like, I wish I'd had a chance to do this again, but they used that cut on the album. So his playing's fine, but it's not his finest hour in his mind, because he thought he could have done better. In any event, that's it. So thanks again so much for watching. Thanks for sticking through these bonus sections. As you can tell, I get kind of excited about it. It's just a little something different to share. But please make sure that you check out some of these other videos here. And if you could please share this video with your friends or other people that you think might like it, I would really appreciate it. All right, take care and cheers.